Aladdin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Aladdin was the son of a poor widow. One day, a wicked magician met him and said, "Take this ring and come with me. If you do as I say, you will be well rewarded." Aladdin followed him for a long distance. At last the magician stopped, and pointing to a stone said, "Lift up that stone, and you will see a ladder. Go down the ladder, open the door, and keep walking until you come to a beautiful garden. There you will find a little lamp which I want you to bring to me." Aladdin climbed down. At last he came to the beautiful garden, where he found rare, precious jewels. He picked up the lamp, which was burning, and taking as many jewels as he could carry, went back to the ladder. The magician saw him and cried, "Hand me the lamp." But Aladdin answered, "Not until you help me get up out of here." The magician angrily closed the great stone down, and left Aladdin there to die. Poor Aladdin wept bitterly. Without knowing it, he rubbed the ring which the magician had given him. To his surprise, a genie appeared. "I am the slave of the ring," he cried. "What do you want?" Aladdin asked him to help him to escape. In a second, the stone flew open, and Aladdin found himself before the door of his house. Later he sold the jewels, and he and his mother became wealthy. One day the emperor's daughter came to town. Aladdin, hiding behind a latticed door, saw the princess and fell in love with her. He told his mother that he wished to marry the princess. His mother wanted him to be happy, so she promised to help him. One day while his mother was polishing the old lamp, another genie appeared. "I am the slave of the lamp," he said. "I must do as you bid me." "Oh, genie," she said, "I wish to marry my son to the emperor's daughter." "I will help you," said the genie. "I will bring you rare jewels from my garden. When the emperor holds court, cast them at his feet, and he will be ready to give his consent to the marriage." The mother did as she was bid, and the emperor was so pleased with the gifts that he told her to bring Aladdin to the palace at once. Aladdin went dressed in beautiful garments brought by the genie. He married the princess, and the genie built them a beautiful palace. One day, an old man passed the palace gate and cried, "New lamps for old ones." The princess gave the old lamp in exchange for a new one. As soon as she handed it to the wicked magician, for it was he dressed as an old man, she and her palace disappeared. Aladdin was in despair when he returned and found his wife and home gone. He called the slave of the ring to help him. The slave said, "I will take you to them, but more I cannot do." One day the princess, looking through the window, was overjoyed to behold Aladdin standing at the gate. Together they planned to get the lamp from the magician. The princess invited the magician to tea. Delighted, he came, but before handing him his cup, the princess dropped a sleeping powder into it. He fell asleep at once. Aladdin, who had been watching from behind a curtain, now came forward and took the lamp from the magician and rubbed it. The genie appeared. Aladdin asked that he, his wife, and palace be transported back again from whence they came. It is said that the wicked magician is still asleep in Africa today, and we hope that he will never wake up again. Aladdin and his beautiful wife lived a long and happy life ever afterwards. End of Aladdin. Recording by Sean Mock.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content.
The Apple of Contentment by Howard Pyle, from the collection Pepper and Salt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amy Benton. The Apple of Contentment by Howard Pyle. There was a woman once, and she had 3 daughters. The first daughter squinted with both eyes, yet the woman loved her as she loved salt, for she herself squinted with both eyes. The second daughter had one shoulder higher than the other, and eyebrows as black as soot in the chimney. Yet the woman loved her as well as she loved the other, for she herself had black eyebrows and one shoulder higher than the other. The youngest daughter was as pretty as a ripe apple, and had hair as fine as silk, and the color of pure gold. But the woman loved her not at all, for, as I have said, she herself was neither pretty, nor had she hair the color of pure gold. Why, all this was so. Even Hans Pfeifendrummel could not tell, though he has read many books and one over. The first sister and the second sister dressed in their Sunday clothes every day, and sat in the sun doing nothing, just as though they had been born ladies, both of them. But as for Christine, for that was the name of the youngest girl, as for Christine, she dressed in nothing but rags, and had to drive the geese to the hills in the morning, and then home again in the evening, so they might feed on the young grass all day and grow fat. The first sister and the second sister had white bread, and butter beside, and as much fresh milk as they could drink. But Christine had to eat cheese parings and bread crusts, and had hardly enough of them to keep Goodman Hunger from whispering in her ear. This was how the churn clacked in that house. Well, one morning Christine started off to the hills with her flock of geese, and in her hand she carried her knitting, at which she worked to save time. So she went along the dusty road, until, by and by, she came to a place where a bridge crossed the brook. And what should she see there but a little red cap, with a silver bell at the point of it, hanging from an alder branch. And it was such a nice, pretty little red cap that Christine thought she would take it home with her, for she had never seen the like of it in all her life before. So she had put it in her pocket, then off she went with her geese again. But she had hardly gone 20 paces when she heard a voice calling her. "Christine! Christine!" She looked, and who should she see but a queer little grey man with a big head, great as a cabbage, and little legs as thin as young radishes. "What do you want?" said Christine, when the little man had come to where she was. Oh, the little man only wanted his cap again, for without it he could not go back home into the hill, and that was where he belonged. But how did the cap come to be hanging from the bush? Yes, Christine would like to know that before she gave it back to him again. Well, the little hill man was fishing by the brook over yonder, when a puff of wind blew his cap into the water, and he just hung it up to dry. That was all there was about it, and now would Christine please give it to him? Christine did not know how about that. Perhaps she would, and perhaps she would not. It was a nice, pretty little cap. What would the little underground man give her for it? That was the question. And oh, the little man would give her $5 for it, and gladly. No, $5, that was not enough for such a pretty little cap. See, there was a silver bell hanging to it, too. Well, the little man did not want to be hard at a bargain. He would give her $100 for it. No, Christine did not care for money. What else would he give for this nice, dear little cap? "See, Christine," said the little man, "I will give you this for the cap." And he showed her something in his hand that looked just like a bean, only it was as black as a lump of coal. "Yes, good. But what is that?" said Christine. "That," said the little man, "is a seed from the Apple of Contentment. Plant it, and from it will grow a tree, and from the tree an apple. Everybody in the world that sees the apple will long for it, but nobody in the world can pluck it but you. It will always be meat and drink to you when you are hungry, and warm clothes to your back when you are cold. Moreover, as soon as you pluck it from the tree, another as good will grow in its place. Now, will you give me my hat?" Oh, yes, Christine would give the little man his cap for such a seed as that, and gladly enough. So the little man gave Christine the seed. Christine gave the little man his cap again. He put the cap on his head, and poof! Away he was gone, as suddenly as the light of a candle when you blow it out. So Christine took the seed home with her, and planted it before the window of her room. The next morning, when she looked out of the window, she beheld a beautiful tree, and on the tree hung an apple that shone in the sun as though it were pure gold. Then she went to the tree, and plucked the apple as easily as though it were a gooseberry, and as soon as she had plucked it, another as good grew in its place. Being hungry, she ate it, and thought that she had never eaten anything as good, for it tasted like pancake with honey and milk. By and by, the oldest sister came out of the house and looked around, and when she saw the beautiful tree with the golden apple hanging from it, you can guess how she stared. And presently she began to long and long for the apple, as she had never longed for anything in her life. "I will pluck it," said she, "and no one would be the wiser for it." But that was easier said than done. She reached and reached, but she might as well have reached for the moon. She climbed and climbed, but she might as well have climbed for the sun, for either one would have been as easy to get at as that which she wanted. At last she had to give up trying for it, and her temper was none the sweeter for that, you may be sure. After a while came the second sister, and when she saw the golden apple, she wanted it just as much as the first had done. But to want and to get are very different things, as she soon found, for she was no more able to get it than the other had been. Last of all came the mother, and she also strove to pluck the apple, but it was no use. She had no more luck of her trying than her daughters. All that the three could do was to stand under the tree and look at the apple and wish for it and wish for it. They were not the only ones who have done the like with the apple of contentment hanging just above them. As for Christine, she had nothing to do but pluck an apple whenever she wanted it. Was she hungry? There was an apple hanging in the tree for her. Was she thirsty? There was the apple. Cold? There was the apple. So you see, she was the happiest girl betwixt all the 7 hills that stand at the ends of the earth, for nobody in the world can have more than contentment, and that was what the apple brought her. One day, a king came riding along the road, and all of his people with him, and he looked up and saw the apple hanging in the tree, and a great desire came upon him to have a taste of it. So he called one of the servants to him and told him to go and ask whether it could be bought for a pot full of gold. So the servant went to the house and knocked on the door. Tap, tap, tap. "What do you want?" said the mother of the 3 sisters, coming to the door. "Oh, nothing much. Only a king was out there in the road and wanted to know if she would sell an apple yonder for a pot full of gold." Oh, yes, the woman would do that. Just pay her the pot of gold, and she might go and pluck it, and welcome. So the servant gave her the pot of gold, and then he tried to pluck the apple. First, he reached for it, and then he climbed for it, and then he shook the limb, but it was no use for him to try. He could no more get it, well, than I could if I had been in his place. At last the servant had to go back to the king. The apple was there, he said, and the woman had sold it. But try and try as he would, he could no more get it than he could get the little stars in the sky. Then the king told the steward to go and get it for him. But the steward, though he was a tall man and a strong man, could no more pluck the apple than the servant. So he had to go back to the king with an empty fist. No, he could not gather it either. Well, then the king himself went. He knew that he could pluck it. Of course he could. Well, he tried, and he tried, but nothing came of his trying, and he had to ride away at last without having had so much as a smell of the apple. After the king came home, he talked and dreamed and thought of nothing but the apple, for the more he could not get it, the more he wanted it. That is the way we are made in this world. At last he grew melancholy and sick for want of that which he could not get. Then he sent for one who was so wise that he had more in his head than 10 men together. Now this wise man told him the only one who could pluck the fruit of contentment for him was the one to whom the tree belonged. This was one of the daughters of the woman who had sold the apple to him for the pot of gold. When the king heard this, he was very glad. He had his horse saddled, and he and his court rode away, and so came at last to the cottage where Christine lived. There they found the mother and the elder sisters, for Christine was away on the hills with her geese. The king took off his hat and made a fine bow. The wise man at home had told him this and that. Now to which one of her daughters did the apple tree belong? Or so said the king. "Oh, it is my oldest daughter who owns the tree," said the woman. "Oh, so good. Then if the oldest daughter would pluck the apple for him, he would take her home and marry her and make a queen of her. Only let her get it for him without delay." "Oh, prut, that would never do." "What? Was the girl to climb the apple tree before the king and all the court? No, no. Let the king go home, and she would bring the apple to him, all in good time." That was what the woman said. Well, the king would do that, only let her make haste, for he wanted it very much indeed. As soon as the king had gone, the woman and her daughters sent for the goose girl to the hills. Then they told her that the king wanted the apple yonder, and that she must pluck it for her sister to take to him. If she did not do as they said, they would throw her in the well. So Christine had to pluck the fruit, and as soon as she had done so, the oldest sister wrapped it up in a napkin and set off with it to the king's house, as pleased could be. Rap, tap, tap, she knocked at the door. She had brought the apple for the king. Oh, yes, she had brought it, and here it was, all wrapped up in a fine napkin. After that, they did not let her stand outside the door till her toes were cold, I can tell you. As soon as she had come to the king, she opened her napkin. Believe me or not, as you please, all the same, I will tell you there was nothing in that napkin but a hard, round stone. And when the king saw only a stone, he was so angry that he stamped like a rabbit, and he told them to put the girl out of the house. And so they did, and she went home with a flea in her ear, I can tell you. Then the king sent his steward to the house where Christine and her sisters lived. He told the woman that he had come to find whether she had any other daughters. Yes, the woman had another daughter, and to tell the truth, it was she who owned the tree. Just let the steward go home again, and the girl would fetch the apple in a little while. As soon as the steward had gone, they sent to the hills for Christine again. Look, she must pluck the apple for the second sister to take to the king, and if she did not do that, they would throw her into the well. So Christine had to pluck it, and gave it to the second sister, who wrapped it up in a napkin and set off for the king's house. But she fared no better than the other, for when she opened the napkin, there was nothing in it but a lump of mud. So they packed her home again with her apron to her eyes. After a while, the king's steward came to the house again. Had the woman no other daughters than these two? Well, yes, there was one, but she was a poor ragged thing, of no account, and fit for nothing in the world but to tend the geese. Where was she? Oh, she was up on the hills, now tending her flock. But could the steward see her? Yes, he might see her, but she was nothing but a poor simpleton. That was all very good, but the steward would like to see her, for that was what the king had sent him there for. So there was nothing to do but send to the hills for Christine. After a while she came, and the steward asked her if she could pluck the apple yonder for the king. Yes, Christine could do that easily enough. So she reached and picked it, as though it had been nothing but a gooseberry on the bush. Then the steward took off his hat, and made her a long bow, in spite of her ragged dress, for he saw that she was the one for whom they had been looking all this time. So Christine slipped the golden apple into her pocket, and then she and the steward set off to the king's house together. When they had come there, everybody began to titter and laugh by the palms of their hands to see that poor ragged goose girl the steward had brought home with him. But for that the steward cared not a rap. "Have you brought the apple?" said the king, as soon as Christine had come before him. "Well, yes, here it was," and Christine thrust her hand into her pocket and brought it forth. Then the king took a great bite of it, and as soon as he had done so, he looked at Christine and thought he had never seen such a pretty girl. As for her rags, he minded them no more than one minds the spots on a cherry, and that was because he had eaten the apple of contentment. And were they married? Of course they were, and a grand wedding it was, I can tell you. It is a pity that you were not there, but though you were not, Christine's mother and sisters were, and what's more, they danced with the others, though I believe they would rather have danced upon pins and needles. "Never mind," said they, "we still have the apple of contentment at home, though we cannot taste of it." But no, they had nothing of the kind. The next morning it stood before the young Queen Christine's window, just as it had at her old home, for it belonged to her, and no one else in all of the world. That was lucky for the king, for he needed a taste of it now and then as much as anybody else, and no one could pluck it for him but Christine. Now, that's all there is of this story. What does it mean? Can you not see? Prut! Rub your spectacles and look again. The end. End of The Apple of Contentment.
Boots and the Troll by George Webb Dasent. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Boots and the Troll by George Webb Dasent. Once upon a time there was a poor man who had 3 sons. When he died, the 2 elders set off into the world to try their luck, but the youngest they wouldn't have with them at any price. "As for you," they said, "you're fit for nothing but to sit and poke about in the ashes." So the 2 went off and got places at a palace, the one under the coachman and the other under the gardener. But Boots, he set off too, and took with him a great kneading trough, which was the only thing his parents left behind them, but which the other 2 would not bother themselves with. It was heavy to carry, but he did not like to leave it behind, and so, after he had trudged a bit, he came to the palace and asked for a place. So they told him they did not want him, but he begged so prettily that at last he got leave to be in the kitchen and carry in wood and water for the kitchen maid. He was quick and ready, and in a little while everyone liked him, but the 2 others were dull, and so they got much more kicks than halfpence, and grew quite envious of Boots when they saw how much better he got on. Just opposite the palace, across a lake, lived a troll, who had 7 silver ducks, which swam on the lake so that they could be seen from the palace. These the king had often longed for, and so the 2 elder brothers told the coachman, "If our brother only chose, he has said he could easily get the king those 7 silver ducks." You may fancy it wasn't long before the coachman told this to the king, and the king called Boots before him and said, "Your brothers say you can get me the silver ducks, so now go and fetch them." I'm sure I never thought or said anything of the kind, said the lad. You did say so, and you shall fetch them, said the king, who would hold his own. Very well, said the lad. Needs must, I suppose, but give me a bushel of rye and a bushel of wheat, and I'll try what I can do. So he got the rye and the wheat, and put them into the kneading trough he had brought with him from home, got in, and rowed across the lake. When he reached the other side, he began to walk along the shore, and to sprinkle and strew the grain, and at last he coaxed the ducks into his kneading trough, and rowed back as fast as he could. When he got half over, the troll came out of his house and set eyes on him. "Hello!" roared out the troll. "Is that you that has gone off with my 7 silver ducks?" "Aye, aye," said the lad. "Shall you be back soon?" asked the troll. "Very likely," said the lad. So when he got back to the king with 7 silver ducks, he was more like than ever, and even the king was pleased to say, "Well done!" But at this his brothers grew more and more spiteful and envious, and so they went and told the coachman that their brother had said, if he chose, he was man enough to get the king the troll's bed quilt, which had a gold patch and a silver patch, and a silver patch and a gold patch. And this time, too, the coachman was not slow in telling all this to the king. So the king said to the lad, how his brothers had said he was good to steal the troll's bed quilt with gold and silver patches, so now he must go and get it, or lose his life. Boots answered he had never thought or said any such thing, but when he found there was no help for it, he begged for 3 days to think over the matter. So, when the 3 days were gone, he rowed over in his kneading trough and went spying about. At last he saw those in the troll's cave come out and hang the quilt out to air, and as soon as ever they had gone back into the face of the rock, Boots pulled the quilt down and rowed away with it as fast as he could. And when he was halfway across, out came the troll and set eyes on him and roared out, "Halloa! Is it you that took my 7 silver ducks?" "Aye, aye," said the lad. "And now, have you taken my bed quilt with silver patches and gold patches and silver patches?" "Aye, aye," said the lad. "Shall you come back again?" "Very likely," said the lad. But when he got back with the gold and silver patchwork quilt, every one was fonder of him than ever, and he was made the king's body servant. At this the other 2 were still more vexed, and to be revenged they went and told the coachman, "Now our brother has said he is man enough to get the king the gold harp which the troll has, and that harp is of such a kind that all who listen when it is played grow glad, however sad they may be." Yes, the coachman went and told the king, and he said to the lad, "If you have said this, you shall do it. You shall do it, and you shall have the princess and half the kingdom. If you don't, you shall lose your life." "I am sure I never thought or said anything of the kind," said the lad, "but if there's no help for it, I may as well try. But I must have 6 days to think about it." Yes, he might have 6 days, but when they were over he must set out. Then he took a 10-penny nail, a birch pin, and a waxen taper end in his pocket, and rowed across and walked up and down before the troll's cave, looking stealthily about him. So when the troll came out and saw him at once, "Ho, ho!" roared the troll. "Is it you who took my 7 silver ducks?" "Aye, aye," said the lad. "And is it you who took my bed quilt with the gold and silver patches?" asked the troll. "Aye, aye," said the lad. So the troll caught hold of him at once and took him off into the cave in the face of the rock. "Now, daughter dear," said the troll, "I've caught the fellow who stole the silver ducks and my bed quilt with gold and silver patches. Put him into the fattening coop, and when he's fat we'll kill him and make a feast for our friends." She was willing enough, and put him at once into the fattening coop. And there he stayed 8 days, fed on the best, both in meat and drink, and as much as he could cram. So when the 8 days were over, the troll said to his daughter to go down and cut him in his little finger, so that they might see if he were fat. Down she came to the coop. "Out with your little finger," she said. But Boots stuck out his 10-penny nail, and she cut at it. "Nay, nay, he's as hard as iron still," said the troll's daughter, when she got back to her father. "We can't take him yet." After another 8 days the same thing happened, and this time Boots stuck out his birchen pin. "Well, he's a little better," she said when she got back to the troll, "but he's still as hard as wood to chew." But when another 8 days were gone, the troll told his daughter to go down and see if he wasn't fat now. "Out with your little finger," said the troll's daughter, when she reached the coop, and this time Boots stuck out the taper end. "Now he'll do nicely," she said. "Will he?" said the troll. "Well then, I'll just set off and ask the guests. Meantime you must kill him, and roast half and boil half." So when the troll had been gone a little while, the daughter began to sharpen a great long knife. "Is that what you're going to kill me with?" asked the lad. "Yes, it is," she said. "But it isn't sharp," said the lad. Just let me sharpen it for you. Then you'll find it easier work to kill me." So she let him have the knife, and he began to rub and sharpen it on the whetstone. "Just let me try it on one of your hair plaits. I think it's about right now." So he got leave to do that, but at the same time that he grasped the plait of hair, he pulled back on her head, and at one gash cut off the Troll's daughter's head, and half of her he roasted, and half of her he boiled, and served it all up. After that he dressed himself in her clothes, and sat away in the corner. So when the Troll came home with his guests, he called out to his daughter, for he thought all the time it was his daughter, to come and take a snack. "No, thank you," said the lad. "I don't care for food. I'm so sad and downcast." "Oh," said the Troll, "if that's all, you know the cure. Take the harp and play a tune on it." "Yes," said the lad, "but where has it got to? I can't find it." "Why, you know well enough," said the Troll. "You used it last. Where should it be but over the door yonder?" The lad did not wait to be told twice. He took down the harp, and went in and out playing tunes, but all at once he shoved off the kneading trough, jumped into it, and rode off so that the foam flew around the trough. After a while the Troll thought his daughter was a long while gone, and when he went out to see what ailed her, then he saw the lad in the trough, far, far out on the lake. "Holloa! Is it you?" he roared, "that took my 7 silver ducks?" "Aye, aye," said the lad. "Is it you that took my bedquilt with the gold and silver patches?" "Yes," said the lad. "And now you've taken off with my gold harp?" screamed the Troll. "Yes," said the lad, "I've got it sure enough." "And haven't I eaten you up after all, then?" "No, no, 'twas your own daughter you ate," answered the lad. But when the Troll heard that, he was so sorry he burst, and the boots rode back, and took a whole heap of gold and silver with him, as much as the trough could carry. And so, when he came to the palace with the gold harp, he got the princess and half the kingdom, as the king had promised him, and as for his brothers, he treated them well, for he thought they had only wished his good when they said what they had said. End of Boots and the Troll. Recording by Chelsea Baker.
The First Puritan Christmas Tree by Anonymous. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The First Puritan Christmas Tree, Anonymous. Mrs. Alcott called her boys and bade them go to the pine woods and get the finest, handsomest young hemlock tree that they could find. Get one that is straight and tall, with well-boughed branches on it, and put it where you can draw it under the woodshed after dark, she added. The boys went to Pine Hill, and there they picked out the finest young tree on all the hill, and said, "We'll take this one." So with their hatchets they hewed it down and brought it safely home the next night, when all was dark. And when Roger was quietly sleeping in the adjoining room, they dragged the tree into the kitchen. It was too tall, so they took it out again and cut it off 2 or 3 feet at the base. Then they propped it up, and the curtains being down over the windows, and blankets being fastened over the curtains to prevent anyone looking in, and the door being doubly barred to prevent anyone coming in, they all went to bed. Very early the next morning, while the stars shone on the snow-covered hills, the same stars that shone 1600 years before on the hills where Christ was born in Bethlehem, the little Puritan mother in New England arose very softly. She went out and lit the kitchen fire anew from the ash-covered embers. She fastened upon the twigs of the tree the gifts she had bought in Boston for her boys and girl. Then she took as many as 20 pieces of candle and fixed them upon the branches. After that she softly called Rupert, Robert, and Lucy, and told them to get up and come into the kitchen. Hurrying back, she began with a bit of burning stick to light the candles. Just as the last one was set aflame, in trooped the 3 children. Before they had time to say a word, they were silenced by their mother's warning. "I wish to fetch Roger in and wake him up before it," she said. "Keep still till I come back." The little lad, fast asleep, was lifted in a blanket and gently carried by his mother into the beautiful presence. "See, Roger, my boy, see," she said, arousing him. "It is Christmas morning now. In England they only have Christmas boughs, but here in New England we have a whole Christmas tree." "Oh, Mother," he cried. "Oh, Lucy, is it really, really true, and no dream at all?" "Yes, I see, oh, Mother, it is so beautiful. Were all the trees on all the hills lighted up that way when Christ was born? And, Mother," he added, clapping his little hands with joy at the thought, "why, yes, the stars did sing when Christ was born. They must be glad then, and keep Christmas too in heaven. I know they must, and there will be good times there." "Yes," said his mother, "there will be good times there, Roger." "Then," said the boy, "I shan't mind going, now I've seen the Christmas bough. What is that, Mother?" What was it that they heard? The little Olcott home had never before seemed to tremble so. There were taps at the window, there were knocks at the door, and it was as yet scarcely the break of day. There were voices also, shouting something to somebody. "Shall I put out the candles, Mother?" whispered Robert. "What will they do for us for having the tree? I wish we hadn't had it," regretted Rupert, while Lucy clung to her mother's gown and shrieked with all her strength, "It's Indians!" Pale and white and still, ready to meet her fate, stood Mrs. Olcott, until, out of the knocking and the tapping at the door, her heart caught a sound. It was a voice calling, "Rachel, Rachel, Rachel!" "Unbar the door," she cried back to her boys. "It's your father calling." Down came the blankets, up went the curtain, open flew the door, and in walked Captain Olcott, surrounded by every man and woman in Plymouth who had heard at the break of day the glorious news that the expected ship had arrived at Boston, and with it the long-lost Captain Olcott. For an instant nothing was thought of except the joyous welcoming of the captain in his new home. "What's this? What is it? What does it mean?" was asked again and again when the first excitement was past, as the tall young pine stood aloft, its candles ablaze, its gifts still hanging. "It's a welcome home to father," said Lucy, her only thought being to screen her mother. "No, child, no," sternly spoke Mrs. Olcott. "Tell the truth." "It's a Christmas tree," faltered poor Lucy. One and another, pilgrims and Puritans all, drew near with faces stern and forbidding, and gazed, until one and another and yet another softened slowly into a smile, as little Roger's piping voice sang out, "She made it for me, Mother did, but you may have it now and all the pretty things that are on it too, because you've brought my father back again, if Mother will let you," he added. Neither Pilgrim or Puritan frowned at the gift. One man, the sternest there, broke off a little twig and said, "I'll take it for the sake of the good old times at home." End of story.
How the Camel Got His Hump by Rudyard Kipling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ellie. How the Camel Got His Hump by Rudyard Kipling. Now this is the tale, and it tells how the camel got his big hump. In the beginning of years, when the world was so new and all, and the animals were just beginning to work for man, there was a camel, and he lived in the middle of a howling desert, because he did not want to work, and besides he was a howler himself. He ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles, most excruciating idle, and when anybody spoke to him he said humph, just humph, and no more. Presently the horse came to him on Monday morning, with a saddle on his back and a bit in his mouth, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come out and trot like the rest of us." "Humph," said the camel, and the horse went away and told the man. Presently the dog came to him, with a stick in his mouth, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and fetch and carry like the rest of us." "Humph," said the camel, and the dog went away and told the man. Presently the ox came to him, with a yoke on his neck, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and plough like the rest of us." "Humph," said the camel, and the ox went away and told the man. At the end of the day the man called the horse and the dog and the ox together, and said, "Three, oh three, I'm very sorry for you, with the world so new and all, but that Humph thing in the desert can't work, or he would have been here by now, and so I'm going to leave him alone and you must work double time to make up for it." That made the three very angry, with the world so new and all, and they held a palaver, and a imbada, and a pankayat, and a powwow, on the edge of the desert, and the Camel came chewing on milkweed, most excruciating idle, and laughed at them. Then he said "Humph," and went away again. Presently there came along the Jinn in charge of all deserts, rolling in a cloud of dust. Jinns always travel that way because it is magic, and he stopped to palaver and powwow with the three. "Jinn of all deserts," said the horse, "is it right for anyone to be idle with the world so new and all?" "Certainly not," said the Jinn. "Well," said the horse, "there's a thing in the middle of your howling desert, and he's a howler himself, with a long neck and long legs, and he hasn't done a stroke of work since Monday morning. He won't trot." "Phew," said the Jinn, whistling, "that's my camel, for all the gold in Arabia. What does he say about it?" "He says 'Humph,'" said the dog, "and he won't fetch and carry." "Does he say anything else?" "Only 'Humph,' and he won't blow," said the ox. "Very good," said the Jinn. "I'll humph him if you will kindly wait a minute." The Jinn rolled himself up in his dust cloak and took a bearing across the desert, and found the camel most excruciatingly idle, looking at his own reflection in a pool of water. "My long babbling friend," said the Jinn, "what is this I hear of your doing no work, with the world so new and all?" "Humph," said the camel. The Jinn sat down with his chin in his hand, and began to think a great magic, while the camel looked at his own reflection in the pool of water. "You have given the three extra work since Monday morning, all on account of your excruciating idleness," said the Jinn, and he went on thinking magics with his chin in his hand. "Humph," said the camel. "I shouldn't say that again if I were you," said the Jinn. "You might say it once too often. Bubbles, I want you to work." And the camel said "Humph" again, but no sooner had he said it than he saw his back, that he was so proud of, puffing up and puffing up into a great big lolloping humph. "Do you see that?" said the Jinn. "That's your very own humph that you have brought upon your very own self by not working. To-day is Thursday, and you have done no work since Monday, when work began. Now you are going to work." "How can I?" said the camel, "with this humph on my back?" "That's made a purpose," said the Jinn, "all because you missed those 3 days. You will be able to work now for 3 days without eating, because you can live on your humph. And don't you ever say I never did anything for you. Come out of the desert and go to the three, and behave. Humph yourself." And the camel humphed himself, humph and all, and went away to join the three, and from that day to this the camel always wears a humph. We call it now Hump, not to hurt his feelings. But he has never yet caught up with the 3 days that he missed at the beginning of the world, and he has never yet learned how to behave. The camel's hump is an ugly lump, which well you may see at the zoo, but uglier yet is the hump we get from having too little to do. Kiddies and grown-ups too, if we haven't enough to do, we get the hump, Camelia's hump, the hump that is black and blue. We climb out of bed with a frowsly head and snarly-yarly voice. We shiver and scold, we grunt and we growl, at our bath, our boots, our toys. And there ought to be a corner for me, and I know there is one for you, when we get the hump, the Camelia's hump, the hump that is black and blue. The cure for this ill is not to sit still, or frowst with a book by the fire, but to take a large hoe and a shovel also, and dig till you gently perspire. And then you will find that the sun and the wind, and the Jinn of the garden too, have lifted the hump, the horrible hump, the hump that is black and blue. I get it as well as you, if I haven't enough to do. We all get the hump, Camelia's hump, kiddies and grown-ups too. End of How the Camel Got His Hump. Recording by Ellie, September 2009. The Iron Stove by Dinah Maria Mallock. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ellie. The Iron Stove by Dinah Maria Mallock. In the days when magic was still of some avail, a king's son was enchanted by an old witch and compelled to spend his life sitting inside a great iron stove in a wood. There he passed many years, and nobody could release him. Once a king's daughter came into the wood. She had gone astray and could not find her father's kingdom again, and having wandered about for 9 days, she at last stood before the iron stove. Then a voice came out of it and said, "Whence do you come? Where do you want to go?" She answered, "I have wandered from my father's kingdom and lost myself, and cannot get home again." Then the voice spoke out of the iron stove, "I will help you home again, and that too in a short time, if you will promise to do what I desire. I am a greater prince than you are a princess. I wish to marry you." She was very much frightened, and thought, "Oh, what shall I do? How can I marry an iron stove?" However, as she wanted very much to go home to her father, she promised what was demanded of her. "Very well," said the voice, "you must come again and bring a knife with you, and scrape a hole in the iron." And the iron stove gave her for a companion something or somebody, she was not quite sure what, who walked by her side and did not speak, but took her safe home within 2 hours. Then there was great joy in her father's palace, and the old king fell on her neck and kissed her many times. But she was very sorrowful and said, "Dear father, you little know what has happened to me. I should never have come home again out of the great wildwood if I had not passed by an iron stove, but I had to promise faithfully that I would return back to it and marry it." The old king was so terrified that he nearly fell into a swoon, for he only had this one child. They therefore consulted together and decided to send, not the princess, but the miller's daughter, who was very beautiful, and leading her out they gave her a knife and told her how she was to scrape the iron stove. When she reached the wood, she scraped away for 24 hours, but could not make the slightest impression. When day began to break, a voice in the iron stove called out, "It seems to me that it is day out there." She answered, "It seems to me so too. I think I hear my father's mill turning." "Oh, then you are a miller's daughter. Go straight back and send the king's daughter here." Then she returned and told the old king that the iron stove would not have her. He wanted the princess only. The old king was greatly frightened, and the princess wept. But they still had a swineherd's daughter, who was still more beautiful than the miller's girl. So they gave her a piece of gold in order that she might be persuaded to go, instead of the king's daughter, to the iron stove. She was taken to the wood as before, and had also to scrape for 24 hours, but she could make no impression. Now, when dawn broke, a voice called out of the stove, "It seems to me it is day out there." Then she answered, "It seems so to me too. I think I hear my father's little horn sounding." "So you are the swineherd's daughter. Go away directly, and bid the king's daughter come, and tell her it shall happen to her as I forewarned her. If she doesn't come, everything in the kingdom shall fall to pieces and tumble down, and no stone remain upon another." When the king's daughter heard this, she began to cry, but there was nothing else to be done. She must keep her promise. She took leave of her father, put a knife in her pocket, and went out to the iron stove in the wood. When she arrived there, she began to scrape and scrape. The iron yielded, and in 2 hours she had already scraped a little hole. She looked in and saw a most beautiful youth. Oh, he shone so with gold and precious stones that he pleased her to the very bottom of her heart. She scraped away faster than ever, till she made the hole so large that he was able to get out. Then he said, "You are mine, and I am yours. You have freed me, and you are my bride." He wished to take her home to his kingdom, but she begged that she might go once more to see her father, and the prince gave her leave, on condition that she should speak no more than 3 words with him, and come back again. So she went home, but alas! Being a little chatterbox, she spoke more than 3 words. The iron stove disappeared instantly, and was removed far away, over glass mountains and sharp swords, but the king's son, being now freed, was not shut up in it. The princess took leave of her father, and took some money with her, but not much, and went again into the great wood. There she looked everywhere for the iron stove, but it was not to be found. She sought it for 9 days, but her hunger was so great that she did not know what to do, for she had eaten all the food she could find, and had nothing left to keep her alive. At evening tide she climbed up into a little tree, and purposed spending the night there, for fear of wild beasts. But when midnight came she saw afar off a glimmering light, and thinking, "Oh, there I should be safe," climbed down and went towards it. Then she came to a little old house, overgrown with grass, with a little heap of wood before the door. Wondering how it came there, she looked in through the window, and saw nothing inside but a number of fat little frogs, and a table beautifully spread. There were on it roast meats and wines, and the plates and cups were of silver. So she took heart and knocked. Immediately the fattest frog called out, "Maiden sweet and small, Hutzelbein I call. Hutzelbein's little dog, creep about and see who this can be." Then a little frog came and opened the door for her, and as soon as she came in the frogs bade her welcome and persuaded her to sit down. They asked, "Whence do you come? Where do you want to go?" Then she told them all that had happened to her, and how, because she had disobeyed the command not to speak to her father more than 3 words, the stove had disappeared, as well as the king's son. Now she was determined to seek him, and to wander over mountain and valley till she found him. The old fat frog said, "Maiden sweet and small, Hutzelbein I call. Hutzelbein's little dog, creep about and see, bring the great box to me." Then the little frog went and brought the box. Afterwards they gave the princess food and drink, and took her to a beautifully made bed, all of silk and velvet. She laid herself in it and slept peacefully. When the day came she arose, and the old frog gave her 3 needles out of a great box, and told her to take them with her. They would be very necessary to her, for she would have to go over a high glass mountain and 3 sharp swords and a great sea. If she passed all those, she would recover her dearest prince. The frog also gave her, besides the 3 needles, other gifts, which she was to take great care of, namely a plough wheel and 3 nuts. With these she set off, and when she came to the slippery glass mountain, she stuck the 3 needles into it as she walked, some before her feet and some behind, and so managed to get across. When she was on the other side, she hid the needles in a place which she had noticed particularly, and went on her way. Afterwards she came to the sharp cutting swords, but she set herself on the plough wheel and rolled safely over them. At last she came before a great lake, which she had to sail across, and when she had done so she saw a great castle. She went in and said she was a poor maiden who wished very much to hire herself out, if she might be taken in there as a servant. For the frogs had told her that the king's son, whom she had released out of the iron stove in the great wood, dwelt there. So she was content to be taken as a kitchen maid, for very small pay. Now the king's son had thought the princess was dead, and there was now with him another maiden, whom he had been persuaded he ought to marry, which grieved the poor kitchen maid very much. In the evening, when she washed up the dishes and had done all her work, she felt in her pocket and found the 3 nuts which the old frog had given her. She bit one open and was going to eat the kernel, when, behold, inside was the most beautiful dress imaginable, so beautiful that the bride soon heard of it, and came and asked to see it, and wanted to buy it, saying it was no dress for a kitchen maid. But the kitchen maid thought differently, and refused to sell it, but offered to give it as a present if the bride would grant her one favor, namely, to sleep one night on the mat outside the bridegroom's door. The bride gave her leave, because the dress was so beautiful, and she had none like it. Now when it was evening, she said to the bridegroom, "The foolish kitchen maid wants to sleep on the mat outside your door." "If you are content, I am," said he. But the bride gave him a glass of wine, in which she had put a sleeping draught, so that he slept so soundly nothing could wake him. While outside the door the princess wept the whole night, saying, "I have released you out of the wildwood, out of an iron stove. In seeking you I have gone over a glass mountain, over 3 sharp swords, and over a great lake. Yet, now that I find you, you will not hear me." Next evening, when she washed up everything, she bit the 2nd nut open, and inside it was a far more beautiful dress than the first, which, when the bride saw it, she wished to buy also. But the girl again refused to take the money, and again begged that she might spend the night outside the bridegroom's door. Once more the bride gave him a sleeping draught, and he slept so soundly that he could hear nothing. But the kitchen maid wept the whole night long, crying, "I have released you out of a wildwood, out of an iron stove, and have gone over a glass mountain, over 3 sharp swords, and over a great lake before I found you, and yet, when I find you, you will not hear me." The 3rd evening she bit open the 3rd nut, and there was in it a still more beautiful dress, which shone stiff with pure gold. When the bride saw it, she wished more earnestly than ever to have it, but the kitchen maid would only give it to her on one condition, that she might sleep for the 3rd time on the mat at the bridegroom's door. But this time the prince was cautious, and left the sleeping draught untouched. Now when she began to weep and to call out, "Dearest treasure, I have released you out of the horrible wildwood, and out of an iron stove," the king's son sprang up and crying out, "This is my right true love. She is mine and I am hers." Then he declared he would not marry the other bride, whom he did not love, and so still in the middle of the night he got into a carriage with the kitchen maid and drove away. When they came to the great lake they sailed over, and at the 3 sharp swords they seated themselves on the plough wheel, and at the glass mountain they found the 3 needles and stuck them in step by step. So they came at last to the little old house, But as they went in, it changed to a great castle. The frogs turned to princes and princesses, all kings' children, and received them both with great joy. There the wedding was celebrated, and they remained in the castle, which was much larger than that which belonged to the princess's father. But as the old man lamented very much his daughter's loss and his own loneliness, they soon went and fetched him home to themselves. So they had 2 kingdoms instead of 1, and lived happily together all their days. End of The Iron Stove. Recording by Ellie, September 2009.
The Little Red Cap by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Little Red Cap. Many years ago there lived a dear little girl who was beloved by everyone who knew her. But her grandmother was so very fond of her that she never felt she could think and do enough to please her dear granddaughter. And she presented this little girl with a red silk cap, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, and was so called Little Red Cap. One day Red Cap's mother said to her, "Come, Red Cap, here is a nice piece of meat and a bottle of wine. Take these to your grandmother. She is weak and ailing, and they will do her good. Be there before she gets up. Go quietly and carefully." The grandmother lived far away in the wood, a long walk from the village, and as Little Red Cap came among the trees, she met a wolf. But she did not know what a wicked animal it was, and so she was not frightened at all. "Good morning, Little Red Cap," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Wolf," she said. "Where are you going so early, Little Red Cap?" "To my grandmother's," she answered. "And what are you carrying in that basket?" "Some wine and meat," she replied. "We baked them yesterday so that grandmother, who is very weak, might have a nice strengthening meal." "And where does your grandmother live?" asked the wolf. "Oh, 20 minutes' walk further in the forest. The cottage stands under 3 great oak trees, and close by are some nutberry bushes, by which you will at once know it." The wolf was thinking to himself, "She is a nice tender thing, and will taste better than the old woman. I must act cleverly that I may make a meal of both." Presently he came up again to Little Red Cap and said, "Just look at the beautiful flowers which grow around you. Why do you not look about you? I believe you don't hear how sweetly the birds are singing. You walk as if you were going to school. See how cheerful everything is about you in the forest." And Little Red Cap opened her eyes, and when she saw how the sunbeams glanced and danced through the trees, and what bright flowers were blooming in her path, she thought, "If I take my grandmother a fresh nosegay, she may be very much pleased, and it is so very early that I can, even then, get there in good time." Running into the forest, she looked about for flowers. But when she had once begun, she did not know how to leave off, and kept going deeper and deeper amongst the trees, looking for some still more beautiful flower. The wolf, however, ran straight to the house of the old grandmother and knocked at the door. "Who's there?" asked the old lady. "Only Little Red Cap, bringing you some meat and wine." "Please open the door," answered the wolf. "Lift up the latch," cried the grandmother. "I am much too ill to get up myself." So the wolf lifted the latch, and the door flew open, and without a word he jumped on to the bed and gobbled up the poor old lady. Then he put on her clothes and tied her nightcap over his head, got into bed, and drew the blankets over him. All this time Red Cap was gathering flowers, and when she had picked so many as she could carry, she thought of her grandmother, and hurried to the cottage. She wondered greatly to find the door open, and when she got into the room she began to feel very ill, and exclaimed, "How sad I feel! I wish I had not come today." Then she said, "Good morning," but received no reply. So she went up to bed and drew back the curtains, and there lay her grandmother, as she imagined, with the cap drawn half over her eyes, and looking very fierce. "Oh, grandmother, what great ears you have!" she said. "All the better to hear you with," was the reply. And what great eyes you have! All the better to see you with. And what great hands you have! All the better to touch you with. But grandmother, what very great teeth you have! All the better to eat you with. And hardly were the words spoken when the wolf made a jump out of bed and swallowed up poor Little Red Cap also. As soon as the wolf had thus satisfied his hunger, he laid himself down again on the bed, and went to sleep, and snored very loudly. A huntsman passing by overheard him, and said, "How loudly that old woman snores! I must see if anything is the matter." So he went into the cottage, and when he came to the bed, he saw the wolf sleeping in it. "What, are you here, you old rascal? I have been looking for you," he exclaimed, and taking up his gun, he shot the old wolf through the head. But it is also said that the story ends in a different manner. For that one day, when Red Cap was taking some presents to her grandmother, a wolf met her and wanted to mislead her. But she went straight on and told her grandmother that she had met a wolf, who had said good day, and who looked so hungrily out of his great eyes, as if he would have eaten her up, had she not been on the high road. So her grandmother said, "We will shut the door, and then he cannot get in." Soon after, up came the wolf, who tapped and exclaimed, "I am Little Red Cap, grandmother. I have some roast meat for you." But they kept quite quiet, and did not open the door. So the wolf, after looking several times round the house, at last jumped on the roof, thinking to wait till Red Cap went home in the evening, and then to creep after her and eat her in the darkness. The old woman, however, saw what the villain intended. There stood before the door a large stone trough, and she said to Little Red Cap, "Take this bucket, dear. Yesterday I boiled some meat in this water, and now pour it into the stone trough." Then the wolf sniffed the smell of the meat, and his mouth watered. He wished very much to taste. At last he stretched his neck too far over, so that he lost his balance and fell down the roof, right into the great trough below, and there he was drowned. End of Little Red Cap.
The Story of the Little Old Woman Who Lived in a Shoe by McLaughlin Brosney. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Little Old Woman Who Lived in a Shoe by McLaughlin Brosney. Once upon a time there was a little old woman who lived in a shoe. This shoe stood near a great forest, and was so large that it served as a house for the old lady and all her children, of which she had so many that, in the words of the old nursery ballad, she did not know what to do with them. But the little old woman was very fond of her children, and they only thought of the best way to please her. Strong Arm, the eldest, cut down trees for the firewood. Peter made baskets of wicker work. Mark was chief gardener. Lizzie milked the cow, and Jenny taught the younger children to read. Now this little old woman had not always lived in a shoe. She and her family had once dwelt in a nice house covered with ivy, and her husband was a woodcutter, like Strong Arm. But there lived in a huge castle beyond the forest a fierce giant, who one day, when fortunately they were all away from home, came and laid their house in ruins with his club. After which he went into the forest, and seeing the father at work, he, in a voice which sounded like thunder among the trees, asked him what he did there. The poor man was dumb with terror, and his knees shook and trembled. The giant said he wanted a man to cut wood for the trees in his castle, and upon this he seized the woodcutter by the waist and carried him off to his castle beyond the forest. When the little old woman came home, her house was in ruins, and her husband was nowhere to be seen. Night came on, and as the father did not return, the old lady and her family went to search for him. When they came to that part of the wood where the giant had met their father, they saw an immense shoe. They spent a long time weeping and calling out for their father, but met with no reply. Then the old lady thought that they had better take shelter in the shoe until they could build a new house. So Peter and Strong Arm put a roof to it, and cut a door and turned it into a dwelling. Here they all lived happily for many years, But the little old lady never forgot her husband and his sad fate. Strong-Arm, who saw how wretched his mother often was about it, proposed to the next 11 brothers that they should go with him, and set their father free from the giant. Their mother knew the giant's strength, and would not hear of the attempt, as she feared they would be killed, but Strong-Arm was not afraid. He bought a dozen sharp swords, and Peter made as many strong shields and helmets, as well as crossbows and iron-headed arrows. They were now quite ready. Strong-Arm gave the order to march, and they started for the forest. The next day they came in sight of the giant's castle. Strong-Arm, leaving his brothers in a wood close by, strode boldly up to the entrance and seized the knocker. The door was opened by a funny little boy with a large head, who kept grinning and laughing. Strong-Arm then walked boldly across the courtyard and presently met a page, who took off his hat and asked him what he wanted. Strong-Arm said he had come to liberate his father, who was kept a prisoner by the giant. On this the little man said he was sorry for him, because the part of the castle in which his father was kept and guarded by a large dragon. Strong-Arm, nothing daunted, soon found the monster, who was fast asleep, so he made short work of him by sending his sword right through his heart, at which he jumped up, uttering a loud scream, and made as if he would spring forward and seize Strong-Arm. But the good sword had done its work, and the monster fell heavily on the ground, dead. Now the giant, who had been drinking much wine, was fast asleep in a remote part of the castle. Strong-Arm had no sooner finished the dragon than up started the funny little boy who had opened the door. He led Strong-Arm round to another part of the courtyard, where he saw his poor father, who at once sprung to his feet and embraced him. Then Strong-Arm called up his brothers, and when they had embraced their father, they soon broke his chain and set him free. We must now return to the little old woman after her son had started. She gave way the most bitter grief. While she was in this state, an old witch came up to her and said she would help her. As she hated the giant and wished to kill him, the old witch then took the little old lady on her broom, and they sailed off through the air, straight to the giant's castle. Now this old witch had great power, and at once afflicted the giant with corns and tender feet. When he awoke from his sleep, he was in such pain that he could bear it no longer. So he thought it would go in search of his missing shoe, which, like the other one he had in his castle, was easy and large for his foot. When he came to the spot where the old lady and her children lived, he saw his old shoe, and with a laugh that shook the trees, he thrust his foot into it, breaking through the roof that Strong-Arm and Peter had put to it. The children, in great alarm, rushed about it inside the shoe, and frightened and trembling, scrambled through the door and the slits, which the giant had formerly made for his corners. By the time the witch and the little old lady, as also Strong-Arm, his 11 brothers and his father, were come up to the spot, Strong-Arm and his brothers shot their arrows at him until at last he fell wounded. When Strong-Arm went up to him and cut off his head, then the father and the little old woman and all their children built a new house and lived happily ever afterwards. End of The Little Old Woman Who Lived in a Shoe. Recording by Chris Caron, Ham Lake, Minnesota.
Snow White by the Brothers Grimm. Translated by Lucy Crane. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Savannah Harold. Snow White by the Brothers Grimm. It was the middle of winter, and the snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky, and a queen sat at her window, working, and her embroidery frame was of ebony. And as she worked, gazing at times out on the snow, she pricked her finger, and there fell from it 3 drops of blood on the snow. And when she saw how bright and red it looked, she said to herself, "Oh, that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the embroidery frame." Not very long after, she had a daughter, with a skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony, and she was named Snow White. And when she was born, the queen died. After a year had gone by, the king took another wife, a beautiful woman, but proud and overbearing, and she could not bear to be surpassed in beauty by anyone. She had a magic looking-glass, and she used to stand before it and look in it, and say, "Looking-glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the looking-glass would answer, "You are fairest of them all." And she was contented, for she knew that the looking-glass spoke the truth. Now Snow White was growing prettier and prettier, and when she was 7 years old she was as beautiful as day, far more so than the queen herself. So, one day, when the queen went to her mirror and said, "Looking-glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" it answered, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but Snow White fairer is than you." This gave the queen a great shock, and she became yellow and green with envy. And from that hour her heart turned against Snow White, and she hated her, and envy and pride like ill weeds grew in her heart, higher every day, till she had no peace day or night. At last she sent for a huntsman, and said, "Take the child out into the woods, so that I may set eyes on her no more. You must put her to death, and bring me her heart for a token." The huntsman consented, and led her away. But when he drew his cutlass to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep, and to say, "Oh, dear huntsman, do not take my life. I will go away into the wild wood, and never come home again." And as she was so lovely, the huntsman had pity on her, and said, "Away with you, poor child," for he thought the wild animals would be sure to devour her, and it was as if a stone had been rolled away from his heart when he spared to put her to death. Just at that moment a young wild boar came running by, so he caught and killed it, and taking out its heart, he brought it to the queen for a token. And it was salted and cooked, and the wicked woman ate it up, thinking that there was an end of Snow White. Now, when the poor child found herself quite alone in the wild woods, she felt full of terror, even of the very leaves on the trees, and she did not know what to do for fright. Then she began to run over the sharp stones and through the thorn bushes, and the wild beasts after her, but they did her no harm. She ran as long as her feet would carry her, and when the evening drew near she came to a little house, and she went inside to rest. Everything there was very small, but as pretty and clean as possible. There stood the little table ready laid, and covered with a white cloth, and 7 little plates, and 7 knives and forks and drinking cups. By the wall stood 7 little beds, side by side, covered with clean white quilts. Snow White, being very hungry and thirsty, ate from each plate a little porridge and bread, and drank out of each little cup a drop of wine, so as not to finish up one portion alone. After that she felt so tired that she lay down on one of the beds, but it did not seem to suit her. One was too long, another too short, but at last the 7th was quite right, so she lay down upon it, committed herself to heaven, and fell asleep. When it was quite dark, the masters of the house came home. They were 7 dwarfs, whose occupation was to dig underground among the mountains. When they had lighted their 7 candles, and it was quite light in the little house, they saw that someone must have been in, as everything was not in the same order in which they left it. The first said, "Who has been sitting in my little chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating from my little plate?" The third said, "Who has been taking my little loaf?" The fourth said, "Who has been tasting my porridge?" The fifth said, "Who has been using my little fork?" The sixth said, "Who has been cutting with my little knife?" The 7th said, Who has been drinking from my little cup?" Then the first one, looking round, saw a hollow in his bed, and cried, "Who has been lying on my bed?" And the others came running, and cried, "Someone has been on our beds too." But when the seventh looked at his bed, he saw little Snow White lying there asleep. Then he told the others, who came running up, crying out in their astonishment, and holding up their 7 little candles to throw a light upon Snow White. "Oh goodness! Oh gracious!" they cried. "What beautiful child is this?" And were all so full of joy to see her that they did not wake her, but let her sleep on. And the 7th dwarf slept with his comrades, an hour at a time with each, until the night had passed. When it was morning, and Snow White awoke and saw the 7 dwarfs, she was very frightened. But they seemed quite friendly, and asked her what her name was, and she told them. And then they asked how she came to be in their house. And she related to them how her stepmother had wished her to be put to death, and how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run the whole day long, until at last she had found their little house. Then the dwarfs said, "If you will keep our house for us, and cook and wash, and make the beds, and sew and knit, and keep everything tidy and clean, you may stay with us, and you shall lack nothing." "With all my heart," said Snow White, and so she stayed, and kept the house in good order. In the morning the dwarfs went to the mountains to dig for gold. In the evening they came home, and their supper had to be ready for them. All the day long the maiden was left alone, and the good little dwarfs warned her, saying, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon know you are here. Let no one into the house." Now the queen, having eaten Snow White's heart, as she supposed, felt quite sure that now she was the first and fairest, and so she came to her mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And then the glass said, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White, living in the glen with the 7 little men, is 1,000 times more fair." Then she was very angry, for the glass always spoke the truth, and she knew that the huntsman must have deceived her, and that Snow White must still be living, and she thought and thought how she could manage to make an end of her, for as long as she was not the fairest in the land, envy left her no rest. At last she thought of a plan. She painted her face, and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, so that no one would have known her. In this disguise she went across the 7 mountains, until she came to the house of the 7 little men, and knocked at the door, and cried, "Fine wares to sell! Fine wares to sell!" Snow White peeped out of the window, and cried, "Good day, good woman. What have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," answered she, "laces of all colors." And then she held up a piece that was woven of variegated silk. "I need not be afraid of letting in this good woman," thought Snow White, and she unbarred the door and bought the pretty lace. "What a figure you are, child," said the old woman. "Come and let me lace you properly for once." Snow White, suspecting nothing, stood up before her, and let her lace her with the new lace. But the old woman laced so quick and tight that it took Snow White's breath away, and she fell down as dead. "Now you have done with being the fairest," said the old woman as she hastened away. Not long after that, towards evening, the 7 dwarfs came home, and were terrified to see their dear Snow White lying on the ground, without life or motion. They raised her up, and when they saw how tightly she was laced, they cut the lace in two, and she began to draw breath, and little by little she returned to life. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "The old peddler woman was no other than the wicked queen. You must beware of letting anyone in when we are not here." And when the wicked woman got home, she went to her glass and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And it answered as before, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." When she heard that, she was so struck with surprise that all the blood left her heart, for she knew that Snow White must still be living. "But now," said she, "I will think of something that will be her ruin." And by witchcraft she made a poisoned comb. Then she dressed herself up to look like another different sort of old woman. So she went across the 7 mountains and came to the house of the 7 dwarfs, and knocked at the door and cried, "Good wares to sell! Good wares to sell!" Snow White looked out and said, "Go away! I must not let anybody in." "Oh, but you are not forbidden to look," said the old woman, taking out the poisoned comb and holding it up. It pleased the poor child so much that she was tempted to open the door, and when the bargain was made, the old woman said, "And now, for once, your hair shall be properly combed." Poor Snow White, thinking no harm, let the old woman do as she would, but no sooner was the comb put in her hair than the poison began to work, and the poor girl fell down senseless. "Now, you paragon of beauty," said the wicked woman, "this is the end of you," and went off. By good luck it was now near evening, and the 7 little dwarfs came home. When they saw Snow White lying on the ground as dead, they thought directly that it was the stepmother's doing, and looked about, found the poisoned comb, and no sooner had they drawn it out of her hair than Snow White came to herself, and related all that had passed. Then they warned her once more to be on her guard, and never again to let anyone in at the door. And the queen went home, and stood before the looking-glass, and said, "Looking-glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the looking-glass answered as before, "Queen, thou art of beauty rare, but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." When she heard the looking-glass speak thus, she trembled and shook with anger. "Snow White shall die," cried she, "though it should cost me my own life." And then she went to a secret lonely chamber where no one was likely to come, and there she made a poisonous apple. It was beautiful to look at, being white with red cheeks, so that anyone who should see it must long for it, but whoever ate even a little bit of it must die. When the apple was ready, she painted her face and clothed herself like a peasant woman, and went across the 7 mountains to where the 7 dwarfs lived. And when she knocked at the door, Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anybody in. The 7 dwarfs told me not to." "All right," answered the woman. "I can easily get rid of my apples elsewhere. There, I will give you one." "No," answered Snow White, "I dare not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" said the woman. "Look here, I will cut the apple in 2 pieces. You shall have the red side, and I shall have the white side." For the apple was so cunningly made that all the poison was in the rosy half of it. Snow White longed for the beautiful apple, and as she saw the peasant woman eating a piece of it, she could no longer refrain, but stretched out her hand and took the poisoned apple. But no sooner had she taken a morsel of it into her mouth than she fell to the earth as dead. And the queen, casting on her a terrible glance, laughed aloud and cried, "As white as snow, as red as blood, as black as ebony, this time the dwarfs will not be able to bring you to life again." And then she went home and asked the looking-glass, "Looking-glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" At last it answered, "You are the fairest now of all." Then her envious heart had peace, as much as an envious heart can have. The dwarfs, when they came home in the evening, found Snow White lying on the ground, and there came no breath of her mouth, and she was dead. They lifted her up, thought if anything poisonous was to be found, cut her laces, combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but all was of no avail. The poor child was dead, and remained dead. Then they laid her on a bier, and sat all 7 of them round it, and wept and lamented 3 whole days. And then they would have buried her, but that she looked still as if she were living, with her beautiful blooming cheeks. So they said, "We cannot hide her away in the black ground." And they made her a coffin of clear glass, so as to be looked into from all sides. And they laid her in it, and wrote in golden letters upon it her name, and that she was a king's daughter. And then they set the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always remained by it to watch. And the birds came too, and mourned for Snow White, first an owl, then a raven, and lastly a dove. Now for a long while Snow White lay in the coffin, and never changed, but looked as if she were asleep, for she was still as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. It happened, however, that one day a king's son rode through the woods, and up to the dwarf's house, which was near it. He saw on the mountain the coffin, and beautiful Snow White within it, and he read what was written in golden letters upon it. Then he said to the dwarfs, "Let me have the coffin, and I will give you whatever you like to ask for it." But the dwarfs told him that they could not part with it for all the gold in the world. But he said, "I beseech you to give it me, for I cannot live without looking upon Snow White. If you consent, I will bring you to great honor, and care for you as if you were my brethren." When he spoke so, the good little dwarfs had pity upon him, and gave him the coffin. And the king's son called the servants, and bid them carry it away on their shoulders. Now it happened that as they were going along, they stumbled over a bush, and with the shaking, the bit of poisoned apple fell out of her throat. It was not long before she opened her eyes, threw up the cover of the coffin, and sat up, alive and well. "Oh dear, where am I?" cried she. The king's son answered, full of joy, "You are near me." And relating all that had happened, he said, "I would rather have you than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's castle, and you shall be my bride." And Snow White was kind, and went with him, and their wedding was held with pomp and great splendor. But Snow White's wicked stepmother was also bidden to the feast, and when she had dressed herself in beautiful clothes, and went to her looking-glass, and said, "Looking-glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" The looking-glass answered, "O Queen, though you are of beauty rare, the young bride is 1,000 times more fair." Then she railed and cursed, and was beside herself with disappointment and anger. First she thought she would not go to the wedding, but then she felt she should have no peace until she went and saw the bride. And when she saw her, she knew her for Snow White, and could not stir from the place for anger and terror. For they had ready red-hot iron shoes, in which she had to dance until she fell down dead. End of Snow White.
The Star Child by Oscar Wilde. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Star Child. Once upon a time, 2 poor woodcutters were making their way home through a great pine forest. It was winter, and a night of bitter cold. The snow lay thick upon the ground, and upon the branches of the trees. The frost kept snapping the little twigs on either side of them as they passed. And when they came to the mountain torrent, she was hanging motionless in air, for the Ice King had kissed her. So cold was it that even the animals and the birds did not know what to make of it. "Ugh!" snarled the wolf, as he limped through the brushwood with his tail between his legs. "This is perfectly monstrous weather. Why doesn't the government look to it?" "Weet, weet, weet," twittered the green linnets. "The old earth is dead, and they have laid her out in her white shroud." "The earth is going to be married, and this is her bridal dress," whispered the turtle doves to each other. Their little pink feet were quite frostbitten, but they felt that it was their duty to take a romantic view of the situation. "Nonsense," growled the wolf. "I tell you that it is all the fault of the government, and if you don't believe me I shall eat you." The wolf had a thoroughly practical mind, and was never at a loss for a good argument. "Well, for my own part," said the woodpecker, who was a born philosopher, "I don't care an atomic theory for explanations. If a thing is so, it is so, and at present it is terribly cold." Terribly cold it certainly was. The little squirrels who lived inside the tall fir tree kept rubbing each other's noses to keep themselves warm, and the rabbits curled themselves up in their holes and did not venture even to look out of doors. The only people who seemed to enjoy it were the great horned owls. Their feathers were quite stiff with brine, but they did not mind, and they rolled their large yellow eyes and called to each other across the forest. "To-wit, to-woo! To-wit, to-woo! What a delightful weather we are having!" On and on went the two woodcutters, blowing lustily upon their fingers and stamping with their huge iron-shod boots upon the caked snow. Once they sank into a deep drift and came out as white as millers are when the stones are grinding, and once they slipped on the hard smooth ice where the marsh water was frozen, and their faggots fell out of their bundles, and they had to pick them up and bind them together again, and once they thought that they had lost their way, and a great terror seized on them, for they knew that the snow is cruel to those who sleep in her arms. But they put their trust in the good Saint Martin, who watches over all travellers, and retraced their steps, and went warily, and at last they reached the outskirts of the forest, and saw, far down in the valley beneath them, the lights of the village in which they dwelt. So overjoyed were they at their deliverance that they laughed aloud, and the earth seemed to them like a flower of silver, and the moon like a flower of gold. Yet, after that they had laughed they became sad, for they remembered their poverty, and one of them said to the other, "Why did we make merry, seeing that life is for the rich, and not for such as we are? Better that we had died of cold in the forest, or that some wild beast had fallen upon us and slain us." "Truly," answered his companion, "much is given to some, and little is given to others. Injustice has parcelled out the world, nor is there equal division of aught save for sorrow." But as they were bewailing their misery to each other, this strange thing happened. There fell from heaven a very bright and beautiful star. It slipped down the side of the sky, passing by the other stars in its course, and, as they watched it wandering, it seemed to them to sink behind a clump of willow trees that stood hard by a little sheepfold no more than a stone's throw away. "Why, there is a crock of gold for whoever finds it," they cried, and they set to and ran, so eager were they for the gold. And one of them ran faster than his mate, and outstripped him, and forced his way through the willows, and came out on the other side, and lo, there was indeed a thing of gold lying on the white snow. So he hastened towards it, and stooping down placed his hands upon it, and it was a cloak of golden tissue, curiously wrought with stars and wrapped in many folds. And he cried out to his comrade that he had found the treasure that had fallen from the sky, and when his comrade had come up, they sat them down in the snow, and loosened the folds of the cloak, that they might divide the pieces of gold. But alas! No gold was in it, nor silver, nor indeed treasure of any kind, but only a little child who was asleep. And one of them said to the other, "This is a bitter ending to our hope, nor have we any good fortune, for what doth a child profit to a man? Let us leave it here, and go our way, seeing that we are poor men, and have children of our own whose bread we may not give to another." But his companion answered him, "Nay, but it were an evil thing to leave the child to perish here in the snow, and though I am as poor as thou art, and have many mouths to feed, and but little in the pot, yet will I bring it home with me, and my wife shall have care of it." So very tenderly he took up the child, and wrapped the cloak around it to shield it from the harsh cold, and made his way down the hill to the village, his comrade marvelling much at his foolishness and softness of heart. And when they came to the village, his comrade said to him, "Thou hast the child, therefore give me the cloak, for it is meet that we should share." But he answered him, "Nay, for the cloak is neither mine nor thine, but the child's only," and he bade him Godspeed, and went to his own house and knocked. And when his wife opened the door and saw that her husband had returned safe to her, she put her arms round his neck and kissed him, and took from his back the bundle of faggots, and brushed the snow off his boots, and bade him come in. But he said to her, "I have found something in the forest, and I have brought it to thee to have care of it." And he stirred not from the threshold. "What is it?" she cried. "Show it to me, for the house is bare, and we have need of many things." And he drew the cloak back, and showed her the sleeping child. "Alack, good man," she murmured, "have we not children enough of our own, that thou must needs bring a changeling to sit by the hearth? And who knows if it will not bring us bad fortune, and how shall we tend it? and she was wroth against him. "Nay, but it is a star-child," he answered, and he told her the strange manner of the finding of it. But she would not be appeased, but mocked at him, and spoke angrily, and cried, "Our children lack bread, and shall we feed the child of another? Who is there who careth for us, and who giveth us food? Nay, but God careth for the sparrows even, and feedeth them," he answered. "Do not the sparrows die of hunger in the winter?" she asked. "And is it not winter now?" And the man answered nothing, but stirred not from the threshold. And a bitter wind from the forest came in through the open door, and made her tremble, and she shivered, and said to him, "Wilt thou not close the door? There cometh a bitter wind into the house, and I am cold." "Into a house where a heart is hard cometh there not always a bitter wind?" he asked. And the woman answered him nothing, but crept closer to the fire. And after a time she turned round and looked at him, and her eyes were full of tears. And he came in swiftly, and placed the child in her arms, and she kissed it, and laid it in a little bed where the youngest of their own children was lying. And on the morrow the woodcutter took the curious cloak of gold, and placed it in a great chest, and a chain of amber that was round the child's neck his wife took and set it in the chest also. So the star-child was brought up with the children of the woodcutter, and sat at the same board with them, and was their playmate. And every year he became more beautiful to look at, so that all those who dwelt in the village were filled with wonder, for while they were swarthy and black-haired, he was white and delicate as sawn ivory, and his curls were like the rings of the daffodil. His lips also were like the petals of a red flower, and his eyes were like violets by a river of pure water, and his body like the narcissus of a field where the mower comes not. Yet did his beauty work him evil, for he grew proud and cruel and selfish. The children of the woodcutter and the other children of the village he despised, saying that they were of mean parentage, while he was noble, being sprung from a star, and he made himself master over them, and called them his servants. No pity had he for the poor, or for those who were blind or maimed or in any way afflicted, but would cast stones at them, and drive them forth on to the highway, and bid them to beg their bread elsewhere, so that none save the outlaws came twice to that village to ask for alms. Indeed, he was as one enamoured of beauty, and would mock at the weakly and ill-favoured, and make jest of them, and himself he loved, and in summer, when the winds were still, he would lie by the well in the priest's orchard, and look down at the marble of his own face, and laugh for the pleasure he had in his fairness. Often did the woodcutter and his wife chide him, and say, "We did not deal with thee as thou dealest with those who are left desolate, and have none to succour them. Wherefore art thou so cruel to all who need pity?" Often did the old priest send for him, and seek to teach him the love of living things, saying to him, "The fly is thy brother, do it no harm. The wild birds that roam through the forest have their freedom, snare them not for thy pleasure. God made the blind worm and the mole, and each has its place. Who art thou to bring pain into God's world? Even the cattle of the field praise him." But the star-child heeded not their words, but would frown and flout, and go back to his companions and lead them. And his companions followed him, for he was fair and fleet of foot, and could dance and pipe and make music. And wherever the star-child led them they followed, and whatever the star-child bade them do, that did they. And when he pierced with a sharp reed the dim eyes of the mole, they laughed, and when he cast stones at the leper they laughed also. And in all things he ruled them, and they became hard of heart even as he was. Now there passed one day through the village a poor beggar-woman. Her garments were torn and ragged, and her feet were bleeding from the rough road on which she had travelled, and she was in very evil plight. And being weary, she sat her down under a chestnut tree to rest. But when the star-child saw her, he said to his companions, "See, there sitteth a foul beggar-woman under the fair and green-leaved tree. Come, let us drive her hence, for she is ugly and ill-favoured." So he came near and threw stones at her, and mocked her, and she looked at him with terror in her eyes, nor did she move her gaze from him. And when the woodcutter, who was cleaving logs in a haggard hard by, saw what the star-child was doing, he ran up and rebuked him, and said to him, "Surely thou art hard of heart, and knowest not mercy. For what evil has this poor woman done to thee, that thou shouldst treat her in this wise?" And the star-child grew red with anger, and stamped his foot upon the ground, and said, "Who art thou to question me what I do? I am no son of thine to do thy bidding." "Thou speakest truly," answered the woodcutter. "Yet did I show thee pity when I found thee in the forest." And when the woman heard these words, she gave a loud cry and fell into a swoon. And the woodcutter carried her to his own house, and his wife had care of her, and when she rose up from the swoon into which she had fallen, they set meat and drink before her, and bade her have comfort. But she would neither eat nor drink, but said to the woodcutter, Didst thou not say that the child was found in the forest? And was it not 10 years from this day? And the woodcutter answered, Yea, it was in the forest that I found him, and it is 10 years from this day. And what signs didst thou find with him? She cried. Bare he not upon his neck a chain of amber? Was not round him a cloak of gold tissue broidered with stars? Truly, answered the woodcutter, it was even as thou sayest. And he took the cloak and the amber chain from the chest where they lay, and showed them to her. And when she saw them, she wept for joy, and said, He is my little son, whom I lost in the forest. I pray thee send for him quickly, for in search of him have I wandered over the whole world. So the woodcutter and his wife went out and called to the Star-Child, and said to him, Go into the house, and there shalt thou find thy mother, who is waiting for thee. So he ran in, filled with wonder and great gladness. But when he saw her who was waiting there, he laughed scornfully, and said, Why, where is my mother? For I see none here but this vile beggar-woman. And the woman answered him, I am thy mother. Thou art mad to say so, cried the Star-Child angrily. I am no son of thine, for thou art a beggar, and ugly, and in rags. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thy foul face no more. Nay, but thou art indeed my little son, whom I bare in the forest, she cried, and she fell on her knees, and held out her arms to him. The robber stole thee from me, and left thee to die, she murmured. But I recognized thee when I saw thee, and the signs also have I recognized, the cloak of golden tissue and the amber chain. Therefore I pray thee come with me, for over the whole world have I wandered in search of thee. Come with me, my son, for I have need of thy love. But the Star-Child stirred not from his place, but shut the doors of his heart against her, nor was there any sound heard save the sound of the woman weeping for pain. And at last he spoke to her, and his voice was hard and bitter. If in very truth thou art my mother, he said, it had been better hadst thou stayed away, and not come here to bring me to shame, seeing that I thought I was the child of some star, and not a beggar's child, as thou tellest me that I am. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thee no more. Alas, my son, she cried, wilt thou not kiss me before I go? For I have suffered much to find thee. Nay, said the Star-Child, but thou art too foul to look at, and rather would I kiss the adder or the toad than thee. So the woman rose up and went away into the forest, weeping bitterly. And when the Star-Child saw that she had gone, he was glad, and ran back to his playmates that he might play with them. But when they beheld him coming, they mocked him, and said, Why, thou art as foul as the toad, and as loathsome as the adder. Get thee hence, for we will not suffer thee to play with us. And they drave him out of the garden. And the Star-Child frowned, and said to himself, What is this that they say to me? I will go to the well of water and look into it, and it shall tell me of my beauty. So he went to the well of water and looked into it, and lo, his face was as the face of a toad, and his body was scaled like an adder. And he flung himself down on the grass and wept, and said to himself, Surely this has come upon me by reason of my sin, for I have denied my mother and driven her away, and been proud and cruel to her. Wherefore I will go and seek her through the whole world, nor will I rest till I have found her. And there came to him the little daughter of the woodcutter, and she put her hand upon his shoulder, and said, What doth it matter if thou hast lost thy comeliness? Stay with us, and I will not mock at thee. And he said to her, Nay, but I have been cruel to my mother, and as a punishment has this evil been sent to me. Wherefore I must go hence, and wander through the world till I find her, and she give me forgiveness. So he ran away into the forest, and called out to his mother to come to him, but there was no answer. All day long he called to her, and when the sun set he lay down to sleep on a bed of leaves, and the birds and the animals fled from him. For they remembered his cruelty, and he was alone save for the toad that watched him, and the slow adder that crawled past. And in the morning he rose up, and plucked some bitter berries from the trees, and ate them, and took his way through the great wood, weeping sorely. And of everything that he met he made inquiry if perchance they had seen his mother. He said to the mole, Thou canst go beneath the earth. Tell me, is my mother there? And the mole answered, Thou hast blinded mine eyes, how should I know? He said to the linnet, Thou canst fly over the tops of the tall trees, and canst see the whole world. Tell me, canst thou see my mother? And the linnet answered, Thou hast clipped my wings for thy pleasure. How should I fly? And to the little squirrel who lived in the fir tree and was lonely, he said, Where is my mother? And the squirrel answered, Thou hast slain mine. Dost thou seek to slay thine also? And the Star-Child wept and bowed his head, and prayed forgiveness of God's things, and went on through the forest, seeking for the beggar-woman. And on the third day he came to the other side of the forest, and went down into the plain. And when he passed through the villages, the children mocked him, and threw stones at him, and the carlers would not suffer him even to sleep in the byres, lest he might bring mildew on the stored corn. So foul was he to look at, and their hired men drave him away, and there was none who had pity on him. Nor could he hear anywhere of the beggar woman who was his mother, though for the space of 3 years he wandered over the world, and often seemed to see her on the road in front of him, and would call to her, and run after her till the sharp flints made his feet to bleed. But overtake her he could not, and those who dwelt by the way did ever deny that they had seen her, or any like to her, and they made sport of his sorrow. For the space of 3 years he wandered over the world, and in the world there was neither love nor loving kindness nor charity for him. But it was even such a world as he had made for himself in the days of his great pride. And one evening he came to the gate of a strong-walled city that stood by a river, and, weary and footsore though he was, he made to enter in. But the soldiers who stood on guard dropped their halberds across the entrance, and said roughly to him, "What is thy business in the city?" "I am seeking for my mother," he answered, "and I pray ye to suffer me to pass, for it may be that she is in this city." But they mocked at him, and one of them wagged a black beard, and set down his shield, and cried, "Of a truth, thy mother will not be merry when she sees thee, for thou art more ill-favoured than the toad of the marsh, or the adder that crawls in the fen. Get thee gone, get thee gone! Thy mother dwells not in this city." And another, who held a yellow banner in his hand, said to him, "Who is thy mother, and wherefore art thou seeking for her?" And he answered, "My mother is a beggar even as I am, and I have treated her evilly, and I pray ye to suffer me to pass, that she may give me her forgiveness, if it be that she tarrieth in this city." But they would not, and pricked him with their spears. And as he turned away weeping, one whose armour was inlaid with gilt flowers, and on whose helmet crouched a lion that had wings, came up and made inquiry of the soldiers who it was who had sought entrance. And they said to him, "It is a beggar and the child of a beggar, and we have driven him away." "Nay," he cried, laughing, "but we will sell the foul thing for a slave, and his price shall be the price of a bowl of sweet wine." And an old and evil-visaged man who was passing by called out, and said, "I will buy him for that price." And, when he had paid the prince, he took the star-child by one hand, and led him into the city. And after that they had gone through many streets, they came to a little door that was set in a wall that was covered with a pomegranate tree. And the old man touched the door with a ring of graved jasper, and it opened. And they went down 5 steps of brass into a garden filled with black poppies and green jars of burnt clay. And the old man took then from his turban a scarf of figured silk, and bound with it the eyes of the star-child, and drave him in front of him. And when the scarf was taken off his eyes, the star-child found himself in a dungeon that was lit by a lantern of horn. And the old man set before him some mouldy bread on a trencher, and said, "Eat," and some brackish water in a cup, and said, "Drink." And when he had eaten and drunk, the old man went out, locking the door behind him and fastening it with an iron chain. And on the morrow the old man, who was indeed the subtlest of the magicians of Libya, and had learned his art from one who dwelt in the tombs of the Nile, came in to him and frowned at him, and said, "In a wood that is nigh to the gate of the city of Jaur there are 3 pieces of gold. One is of white gold, and another is of yellow gold, and the gold of the third one is red. Today thou shalt bring me the piece of white gold, and if thou bringest it not back, I will beat thee with 100 stripes. Get thee away quickly, and at sunset I will be waiting for thee at the door of the garden. See that thou bringest the white gold, or it shall go ill with thee, for thou art my slave, and I have bought thee for the price of a bowl of sweet wine." And he bound the eyes of the star-child with a scarf of figured silk, and led him through the house, and through the garden of poppies, and up the 5 steps of brass. And having opened the little door with his ring, he set him in the street. And the star-child went out of the gate of the city, and came to the wood of which the magician had spoken to him. Now this wood was very fair to look at from without, and seemed full of singing birds and of sweet-scented flowers, and the star-child entered it gladly. Yet did its beauty profit him little, for wherever he went harsh briars and thorns shot up from the ground and encompassed him, and evil nettles stung him, and the thistle pierced him with their daggers, so that he was in sore distress. Nor could he anywhere find the piece of white gold of which the magician had spoken, though he sought for it from morn to noon, and from noon to sunset. And at sunset he set his face towards home, weeping bitterly, for he knew what fate was in store for him. But when he had reached the outskirts of the wood, he heard from a thicket a cry as of someone in pain. And forgetting his own sorrow, he ran back to the place, and saw there a little hare caught in a trap that some hunter had set for it. And the star-child had pity on it, and released it, and said to it, I am myself but a slave, yet may I give thee thy freedom. And the hare answered him and said, Surely thou hast given me freedom, and what shall I give thee in return? And the Star-Child said to it, I am seeking for a piece of white gold, nor can I anywhere find it, and if I bring it not to my master he will beat me. Come thou with me, said the hare, and I will lead thee to it, for I know where it is hidden, and for what purpose. So the Star-Child went with the hare, and lo, in the cleft of a great oak tree he saw the piece of white gold that he was seeking. And he was filled with joy, and seized it, and said to the hare, The service that I did to thee thou hast rendered back again many times over, and the kindness that I showed thee thou hast repaid 100-fold. Nay, answered the hare, but as thou dealt with me, so I did deal with thee. And it ran away swiftly, and the Star-Child went towards the city. Now at the gate of the city there was seated one who was a leper. Over his face hung a cowl of grey linen, and through the eyelets his eyes gleamed like red coals. And when he saw the Star-Child coming, he struck upon a wooden bowl, and clattered his bell, and called out to him, and said, Give me a piece of money, or I must die of hunger, for they have thrust me out of the city, and there is no one who has pity on me. Alas, cried the Star-Child, I have but one piece of money in my wallet, and if I bring it not to my master he will beat me, for I am his slave. But the leper entreated him, and prayed of him, till the Star-Child had pity, and gave him the piece of white gold. And when he came to the magician's house, the magician opened to him, and brought him in, and said to him, Hast thou the piece of white gold? And the Star-Child answered, I have it not. So the magician fell upon him, and beat him, and set him before an empty trencher, and said, Eat, and an empty cup, and said, Drink, and flung him again into the dungeon. And on the morrow the magician came to him, and said, If today thou bringest me not the piece of yellow gold, I will surely keep thee as my slave, and give thee 300 stripes. So the Star-Child went to the wood, and all day long he searched for the piece of yellow gold, but nowhere could he find it. And at sunset he sat him down, and began to weep, and as he was weeping there came to him the little hare that he had rescued from the trap. And the hare said to him, Why art thou weeping, and what dost thou seek in the wood? And the Star-Child answered, I am seeking for a piece of yellow gold that is hidden here, and if I find it not my master will beat me, and keep me as a slave. Follow me, cried the hare, and it ran through the wood till it came to a pool of water, and at the bottom of the pool the piece of yellow gold was lying. How shall I thank thee? Said the Star-Child, for lo, this is the second time that you have succoured me. Nay, but thou hadst pity on me first, said the hare, and it ran away swiftly. And the Star-Child took the piece of yellow gold, and put it in his wallet, and hurried to the city. But the leper saw him coming, and ran to meet him, and knelt down and cried, Give me a piece of money, or I shall die of hunger. And the Star-Child said to him, I have in my wallet but one piece of yellow gold, and if I bring it not to my master he will beat me, and keep me as a slave. But the leper entreated him sore, so that the Star-Child had pity on him, and gave him the piece of yellow gold. And when he came to the magician's house, the magician opened to him, and brought him in, and said to him, Hast thou the piece of yellow gold? And the Star-Child said to him, I have not. So the magician fell upon him, and beat him, and loaded him with chains, and cast him again into the dungeon. And on the morrow the magician came to him, and said, If today thou bringest me the piece of red gold, I will set thee free, but if thou bringest it not, I will surely slay thee. So the Star-Child went to the wood, and all day long he searched for the piece of red gold, but nowhere could he find it. And at evening he sat him down and wept, and as he was weeping there came to him the little hare. And the hare said to him, The piece of red gold that thou seekest is in the cavern that is behind thee. Therefore weep no more, but be glad. How shall I reward thee? Cried the Star-Child. For lo, this is the third time thou hast succoured me. Nay, but thou hadst pity on me first, said the hare, and it ran away swiftly. And the Star-Child entered the cavern, and in its farthest corner he found a piece of red gold. So he put it in his wallet, and hurried to the city. And the leper, seeing him coming, stood in the centre of the road, and cried out, and said to him, Give me the piece of red money, or I must die. And the Star-Child had pity on him again, and gave him the piece of red gold, saying, Thy need is greater than mine. Yet his heart was heavy, for he knew what evil fate awaited him. But lo, as he passed through the gate of the city, the guards bowed down and made obeisance to him, saying, How beautiful is our Lord! And a crowd of citizens followed him, and cried out, Surely there is none so beautiful in the whole world! So that the Star-Child wept, and said to himself, They are mocking me, and making light of my misery. And so large was the concourse of the people, that he lost the threads of his way, and found himself at last in a great square, in which there was a palace of a king. And the gate of the palace opened, and the priests and the high officers of the city ran forth to meet him, and they abased themselves before him, and said, Thou art our Lord, for whom we have been waiting, and the son of our king. And the Star-Child answered them and said, I am no king's son, but the child of a poor beggar woman. And how say ye that I am beautiful, for I know that I am evil to look at? Then he whose armour was inlaid with gilt flowers, and on whose helmet crouched a lion that had wings, held up a shield, and cried, How saith my lord that he is not beautiful? And the Star-Child looked, and lo, his face was even as it had been, and his comeliness had come back to him, and he saw that in his eyes which he had not seen there before. And the priests and the high officers knelt down and said to him, It was prophesied of old that on this day should come he who was to rule over us. Therefore let our Lord take this crown and this sceptre, and be in his justice and mercy our king over us. But he said to them, I am not worthy, for I have denied the mother who bare me, nor may I rest till I have found her, and known her forgiveness. Therefore let me go, for I must wander again over the world, and may not tarry here, though ye bring me the crown and the sceptre. And as he spake, he turned his face from them towards the street that led to the gate of the city, and lo, amongst the crowd that pressed round the soldiers, he saw the beggar woman who was his mother, and at her side stood the leper who had sat by the road. And a cry of joy broke from his lips, and he ran over, and kneeling down he kissed the wounds on his mother's feet, and wet them with his tears. He bowed his head in the dust, and sobbing, as one whose heart might break, he said to her, Mother, I denied thee in the hour of my pride. Accept me in the hour of my humility. Mother, I gave thee hatred. Do thou give me love. Mother, I rejected thee. Receive thy child now. But the beggar woman answered him not a word. And he reached out his hands and clasped the white feet of the leper, and said to him, Thrice did I give thee of my mercy. Bid my mother speak to me once. But the leper answered him not a word. And he sobbed again and said, Mother, my suffering is greater than I can bear. Give me thy forgiveness, and let me go back to the forest. And the beggar woman put her hand on his head, and said to him, Rise. And the leper put his hand on his head, and said to him, Rise also. And he rose up from his feet, and looked at them, and lo, they were a king and a queen. And the queen said to him, This is thy father whom thou hast succoured. And the king said, This is thy mother whose feet thou hast washed with thy tears. And they fell on his neck and kissed him, and brought him into the palace, and clothed him in fair raiment, and set the crown upon his head, and the sceptre in his hand, and over the city that stood by the river he ruled, and was its lord. Much justice and mercy did he show to all, and the evil magician he banished, and to the woodcutter and his wife he sent many rich gifts, and to their children he gave high honour. Nor would he suffer any to be cruel to bird or beast, but taught love and loving-kindness and charity, and to the poor he gave bread, and to the naked he gave raiment, and there was peace and plenty in the land. Yet ruled he not long, so great had been his suffering, and so bitter the fire of his testing, for after the space of 3 years he died, and he who came after him ruled evilly. Here ends The Star-Child by Oscar Wilde.
Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Brian Johnson, aka Joe Kooning. joekooning@gmail.com. There were once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window at the back of their house, from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to go into it, because it belonged to an enchantress, who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day the woman was standing by this window and looked down into the garden, when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it. She quite pined away and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed and asked, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I can't eat some of the rampion which is in the garden behind our house, I shall die." The man who loved her thought, "Sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of the rampion yourself, let it cost what it will." At twilight he clambered down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion, and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it, and ate it greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of evening, therefore, he let himself down again. But when he had clambered down the wall, he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him.
"How dare you," she said with an angry look, "descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You will suffer for it."
"Ah," answered he, "let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window, and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not got some to eat." Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened, and said to him,
"If the case be as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will. Only I make one condition. You will give me the child your wife will bring into the world. It shall be well treated, and I will care for it like a mother."
The man in his terror consented to everything, and when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her in a tower, which lay in a forest and had neither stairs nor door, but quite at the top was a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me."
Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them round one of the hooks of the window above, and then the hair fell 20 ells down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. After a year or two, it came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. Then he heard a song which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passing her time in letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her, and looked for the door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once when he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and he heard how she cried,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me."
Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If this is the ladder by which one mounts, I too will try my fortune," said he, and the next day when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Immediately the hair fell down, and the king's son climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man, such as her eyes had never yet beheld, came to her. But the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it had let him have no rest, and he had been forced to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "He will love me more than old Dame Gothel does." And she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said, "I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a skein of silk every time that you come, and I will weave a ladder with it, and when that is ready I will descend, and you will take me on your horse." They agreed that until that time he should come to her every evening, for the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this until once Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so much heavier for me to draw up than the king's son. He is with me in a moment."
"Ah, you wicked child!" cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me."
In her anger she crushed Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, wrapped them twice around her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with the right, and snip, snap, they were cut off, and the lovely braids lay on the ground, and she was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into the desert, where she had to live in great grief and misery. On the same day that she cast out Rapunzel, however, the enchantress fastened the braids of hair which she had cut off to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me," she let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and venomous looks.
"Aha!" she cried mockingly. "You would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest. The cat has got it, and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you, and you will never see her again."
The king's son was so beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered quite blind about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did naught but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at length came to the desert where Rapunzel, with the twins to which she had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it. And when he approached, Rapunzel knew him and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and content. End of Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm.